All right, you guys, it is loading. Okay, so today we're talking about getting upper level AP essays, basically what you need to do to get a 5 or a 6. And there are several ways to do this. We're going to talk about one right now. So we have to start with what we know about getting a 4. So, how to get to that 4 level. And so, this is a 4 overall. I'm assuming a 4 overall means you have the thesis point and then you have a 3 on evidence and commentary. So, that obviously combining to get a 4. So, to do that, you have to have a thesis that answers the question, like the topic of the prompt, and talks about theme. And actually, I will say to get that thesis point, you don't necessarily have to talk about theme to get that thesis point in, depending on which question you're answering. But this is a good thesis, so let's say that here. And then you have to have a claim, detail, and commentary with at least 2 details per claim, 2 distinct claims, and with commentary that connects your details to your claim, to your topic, and to the theme. So this is what we've been saying before, right? So claim, detail, commentary. Each body paragraph has to start with a claim. You need at least 2 details per body paragraph. Your 2 body paragraphs, your 2 claims need to be different enough where it's actually 2 different things, not just the same thing you're saying twice. And your commentary needs to connect those details to your claim, to your topic, and also to your theme. So, this is what I've said about getting a 4. Now, technically, if you really do all of this, you really should get a 5 because you would have a 4 in evidence and commentary and a 1 in your thesis. However, what happens is even if you have a theme in your thesis statement and you try to connect to it, what I'm seeing in your essays is that it's still not quite at the 5 level. And the reason for that is because of this theme. So if you're doing all this right now, you're probably getting a 4. And there is like one step we need to take with theme to get you to a 5. So getting that 4 in evidence and commentary or getting the sophistication point is the way to get these last 2 points. If you have the main things down, you can probably get a 4 if you're doing it well. But getting these last two, excuse me, are the difficult things. So we're talking about this one today, getting a 4 in evidence and commentary. If you look at the rubric, you'll see that the only difference between a 3 or a 4 in evidence and commentary is that the response must address an interpretation about the work as a whole. Theme. So, again, if you're addressing theme, you're getting it. However, like I said, what I'm finding is your themes are not working out for this. And let's look at why. So, the problem, if your topic and theme are too similar, there's really not enough complexity to earn this additional point. Now, I'm going to go ahead and admit that I think part of the problem we're seeing is because of the prompts I'm giving. I've been giving you some prompts that are meant to be pretty easy to get a 4 on the overall essay. I'm trying to make it really clear, but I think the prompts are also lending themselves to some very simplistic themes. So I'm going to work on that. But I do want to tell you kind of one way to address this problem, no matter what the prompt is. So when I mean that they're simple, there's not enough complexity. Let's take a look. These are 2 thesis statements that I pulled from your essays, and these are good thesis statements. So, in Othello, Shakespeare develops Desdemona's naive sense of morality by using point of view and tone to show that sometimes being too trusting with others leads to deception. This is a great thesis statement. It gives me the topic, her naive sense of morality. It tells me what the body paragraphs are going to be about, which again, you don't have to do. Sometimes that can be a little simplistic, but I personally don't mind you doing that. So, point of view and tone. And then to show that sometimes being too trusting with others leads to deception. So, here is this could end up being an excellent essay, but here's a problem it could run into. So, we're talking about Desdemona being naive. And then our theme is being too trusting leads to deception. Well, if you've noticed, being naive is being too trusting. And so it's kind of difficult to write about 2 distinct things here because we're talking about her being naive. We're talking about um, being too trusting, and it's basically the same thing. So With that in mind, let's look at this next one. In Iago's second soliloquy, Shakespeare develops Iago's sordid sense of morality through tone and imagery, which exhibits that some people will go to extremes for revenge. This one I think has a little bit more potential. It's not quite as similar, sordid sense of morality and then going to extremes, but it could be similar because basically our topic is okay, Iago is bad. And then our theme is about how people can be bad. And it's a little more specific, but it could run into the problem of really just talking about the same thing. So, really, the whole point of addressing an interpretation about the work as a whole with this is to add a layer of complexity. So, if we're not really adding a layer of complexity, it's hard to get that point. So, how do you fix that? Well, I've been thinking about this for you guys because it's a really hard thing to think about fixing. It's really requiring you to make sure that you're thinking on this big complex scale, and there's not really an easy way to tell you how to do that, especially if I think about how I do these things. I'm just often thinking on a big complex scale because of life experiences and all the writing I've done. And I've read so many papers, and I'm just thinking about those kind of things because of my experience. So, how do I help you guys do that without the same life experience? So, I try to come up with something easy, and I think this might help. So, adding depth to your theme by connecting it to an idea of universal importance. So, we've talked about how themes are supposed to be universal. They're supposed to not talk about the character, but a universal idea. And you all are doing that, but are you connecting it to an idea that's universally important? How do you know what is important? Now, I mean, obviously that's subjective, but I thought I could give you one thing that might help you add some importance, whatever that means, to your theme. So that's the idea of power and agency. Generally, a lot of what you're going to read when you think about literary criticism is about power and agency. So, this is who has the power, who has the control. And this can be regarding lots of different things: gender, sexuality, class and wealth, race, nationality, status, position, age, ability, all these things, or none of these things. But often, when we are reading, if we want to connect what we're reading to one of these ideas related to power or control, agency over your own life, we can really add an importance to what we're talking about. And so when we're looking at these, we could be subverting power, relinquishing power, claiming power, disenfranchising, which means like taking power away from someone else. So these are the kind of things you might want to start considering when you're writing a theme. So let's look at an example of updating these. So I took these two thesis statements that we already have that were already pretty good, and then I changed them to barely changed them, but I changed them to be more about power or agency. So we had in Othello, Shakespeare develops Desdemona's naive sense of morality by using point of view and tone to show that sometimes being too trusting with others leads to deception. Well, I changed it to sometimes being too trusting diminishes one's agency. So instead of just leading to deception, which is kind of on a small scale, like obviously an individual can be deceived, and that does work as a theme, I changed it to being too trusting diminishes one's agency. It diminishes one's power over oneself. That's kind of a larger idea rather than just being deceived, but also losing power. Now, notice I didn't really change the fact that being naive is still similar to being too trusting. That is pretty close. But we changed it from just this personal thing, oh, if you're naive, then bad things will happen, to if you're naive, you lose power. That adds another dynamic that you can connect to throughout the essay that can really help you get to that next level. Same with this one. In Iago's second soliloquy, Shakespeare develops Iago's sordid sense of morality through tone and imagery, which exhibits that some people will go to extremes for revenge. Instead, I said, which exhibits that some people will go to extremes when they feel disenfranchised. So now it's just not just about the personal idea of revenge, but it's about the more universal idea of losing power. Iago feels like he is losing power. He wanted this position, he didn't get it. He feels like other people are having more power than he does and he feels powerless. And that is what is maybe spurring all this on. So instead of it, again, just being about the personal things in the play about revenge, which you can make it a universal idea, like lots of people experience that idea of revenge. Now you're changing it to a more power-based level, which makes it more just more universal and more important to larger ideas. So then obviously we want to think about how do you write about that, which we'll talk about that later. But that is one thing you can start thinking of. Um, Instead of me trying to like teach you years of critical theory or whatever, if you just start thinking about your themes and how they relate to power. So going back, if I can, no, that's the wrong way, to these ideas. And of course, you have this if you want to look back on these ideas. So with the Iago one, it was about status and position. You could talk about that. With the Desdemona one, it was more about just, it wasn't necessarily about gender. It was just about, her losing power over herself. But you absolutely could bring gender into it. And that would add, I would say, even another layer of complexity, which we'll talk about in a different lesson. But yeah, so think about these things as you're writing your themes and see if you can get some more powerful themes out of that.